So, Georgia texted me from Dubai 3 days ago. Not a normal text, a paragraph specifically designed to destroy me, followed by a video that made it crystal clear she wanted me to know exactly what she was doing and with whom. Let me back up for a second because you need context for why what I did next was so satisfying. Georgia and I had been together for 2 years. I'm 29, work in logistics management, decent salary, but nothing crazy. She's 27, works in event planning, always complained the job didn't pay enough for her lifestyle. We'd been living together for 8 months in my apartment that I'd been renting for 3 years before she moved in. The lease was in my name only. She contributed to groceries and utilities, but I covered rent because she said she was saving for her future business venture that never materialized. About 6 months ago, she started talking about this work conference in Dubai. Her company was sending a few people to network with international clients and scout venues for destination events. She was excited. I was supportive. Told her it would be great for her career. I even helped her pack. Took her to the airport. Kissed her goodbye like an absolute fool. The conference was supposed to be 5 days, Wednesday through Sunday. She left on Tuesday night. Everything seemed normal. She texted me when she landed Thursday morning. Sent a few photos of the hotel lobby and conference rooms. Complained about jet lag. Then Friday afternoon, my phone lit up with a message that made me read it 3 times because I genuinely couldn't process what I was seeing. The text came through WhatsApp. Started with, "Finally met a real man here." Then she went on about how he owns an entire floor of the hotel she's staying at. How he laughed when she mentioned my job. Called it pathetic. Said she was staying with him instead of coming home. Told me to enjoy paying bills alone and called me a loser. Then the real twist. She had cleared out our joint checking account that morning for what she called a shopping spree. Compensation for wasting her time with me, apparently. I stared at that message, read it again. Then came the video. It was her in a massive jacuzzi that overlooked the Dubai skyline at night. The suite behind her looked like something from a luxury magazine. And she wasn't alone. Some guy with gray hair, maybe mid-40s, had his arm around her. She was wearing the diamond earrings I'd bought her last Christmas. The ones I'd saved for 3 months to afford. She was laughing, tilting her champagne glass toward the camera like she was toasting to my humiliation. Here's what probably would have destroyed most guys. The pure calculated cruelty of it. She didn't accidentally get caught. She didn't slip up. She wanted me to know. Wanted me to see her with him in his wealth wearing my gifts while she mocked everything about my life. But here's what she didn't know. I'd been suspicious for weeks, not about cheating specifically, but about her attitude shift. The way she'd started making comments about my car being too old, my apartment being too small, my salary being too average. She'd started following a bunch of luxury lifestyle accounts on Instagram, showing me photos of penthouses and sports cars and private jets with this look in her eyes like she was starving for something I couldn't provide. Her friend Ivy had recently married some finance guy, and Georgia had been weird ever since that wedding, constantly comparing our relationship to theirs. So, when this conference came up, something in my gut told me to be careful. I'd already moved most of my savings to a separate account she didn't know about 2 weeks before she left. The joint account we shared only had about $3,200 in it. Money we used for shared expenses. My main accounts, my investment accounts, everything important was already protected. I sat there on my couch, phone in my hand, and I didn't feel shocked. I felt vindicated. She'd just shown me exactly who she was and handed me every tool I needed to respond. First thing I did was open my banking app, checked the joint account. Sure enough, she'd withdrawn $2,800 that morning, Dubai time. Left $400 in there like she was being generous. I immediately locked the account, froze all transactions, and started the process to remove her access entirely. Then I went through every credit card I had. I'd made her an authorized user on 2 of them about a year ago when she said it would help her build credit. Removed her from both within minutes. Every retail store card, every subscription service that had her name attached to my payment methods gone. But the real move, the one I'd been saving, was the hotel reservation. See, her company had booked conference rates for attendees at the official hotel. But Georgia had complained it wasn't nice enough. She'd found this 5-star place instead and begged me to book it for her on my credit card because her card kept getting declined for international holds. Said she'd pay me back. I'd booked 5 nights under my name with my card. Confirmation email had gone to my account. I pulled up the hotel's website, found their international customer service number, called them right there at 9 p.m. my time, which was 6 a.m. in Dubai, explained to the very professional woman who answered that I needed to cancel a reservation. Gave her the confirmation number. She pulled it up and started going through their cancellation policy, mentioning fees since it was such short notice. I told her I understood, canceled it anyway. She processed it, asked if the guest had been notified of an early checkout. I said I'd handle that personally. The whole call took maybe 8 minutes. Then I just sat there, didn't text her back, didn't call, didn't acknowledge her message at all, just went to bed. Saturday morning, I woke up to 14 missed calls from Georgia, all between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. my time. Then the voicemail started. The first one was still cocky. She was mad I wasn't responding. Said I was being childish. Told me to grow up and accept reality. Said her new man was taking her shopping and I couldn't do anything about it. Second voicemail came an hour later, different tone. She'd tried to use one of my cards at some designer store, and it got declined. She was confused. Thought maybe it was a fraud alert. Asked me to call the bank. Third voicemail was angry. She'd figured out I'd removed her from the cards. Started yelling about how petty I was being, how she deserved that money after putting up with my mediocre life for 2 years. By voicemail 7, which came Saturday afternoon, her voice had changed completely. The hotel had informed her that the reservation was canceled and she needed to settle her bill immediately or vacate the room. She was trying to reach her new wealthy friend, but he wasn't answering. She needed me to fix this now because they were threatening to call authorities if she didn't pay. I listened to each voicemail while eating breakfast. Didn't call back, didn't text, just deleted them one by one and went to the gym. Sunday, the messages got desperate. She tried calling her company, but they said the conference hotel was full and they couldn't help her with personal accommodation choices. Her cards were maxed out from the shopping spree she'd done Saturday. The wealthy guy had apparently blocked her number after she asked him for help with the hotel situation, and the hotel staff had taken her bags as collateral until she paid her bill. By Sunday night, I had 47 voicemails and probably 60 WhatsApp messages that went from angry to panicked to begging. She was sorry. She made a huge mistake. She loved me. Please help her. She was going to miss her flight home Monday morning if she couldn't get her bags back and pay the hotel. I didn't respond to a single message. Monday morning, my phone exploded again. She'd missed her flight. The hotel had actually called local authorities because she couldn't pay. Some tourist police officer had mediated, and she'd had to surrender her phone and laptop as additional collateral while she figured out payment. She was messaging from someone else's phone now, begging, crying in the voice messages, saying she'd do anything. Her mother, Veronica, started calling Monday afternoon. Somehow, Georgia had reached her family. Veronica was demanding I explain why I wasn't helping her daughter, who was stranded in a foreign country. I sent Veronica a screenshot of Georgia's original message and the video. Then I blocked her. Georgia's sister Ivy called next. Same energy, saying I was being cruel, that whatever Georgia did, I couldn't just abandon her overseas. I sent her the screenshots, too. Told her Georgia cleared out our joint account and made her choices. Ivy told me I was insecure and pathetic before hanging up. It's Tuesday now. Georgia finally got someone to bail her out. I think her father wired her money, and she's on a flight back that lands tonight. She's been messaging from multiple numbers because I kept blocking her, saying we need to talk face to face, that she can explain everything. That the guy manipulated her and she was stupid, but she loves me and wants to fix this. Here's what she doesn't understand yet. She thinks this was just about the money and the hotel. She thinks if she comes back and apologizes and maybe cries enough, we'll move past this. But I've spent the last 4 days going through every single thing in my apartment that belongs to her. Every piece of clothing, every toiletry, every book and decoration and kitchen item. I've packed it all into boxes, changed my locks, called my landlord, and explained the situation. He was actually cool about it and updated the lease to explicitly remove any guest residency claims. She's going to land tonight, expecting to come home to me, to our apartment, where she still has keys that no longer work, to the relationship she thought she could disrespect and crawl back to. The game is just beginning. And unlike her, I've been planning my moves while she was busy playing hers. Update 1. Okay, so for everyone who commented on my last post, thank you for the support, and also shout out to the person who told me to check if she'd taken anything else of value before she left. That comment saved me because I found out she'd actually stolen more than just the joint account money. And I'll get to that in a second. Georgia's flight landed Tuesday night around 9 p.m. I knew the exact time because she'd been messaging me from her father's phone with the flight details, begging me to pick her up from the airport. I ignored every message, turned off my phone, and went to the gym instead because I knew what was coming and I needed to be clear-headed for it. Got home around 11 p.m. and she was already there, standing in the hallway outside my apartment door with 4 giant shopping bags and her suitcase, trying her key over and over, even though I'd told her via text that morning the locks were changed. She looked exhausted, and her makeup was smeared like she'd been crying on the plane. The second she saw me, she started in immediately. Not with an apology or even an attempt at remorse, with anger. She was furious I'd changed the locks, demanding to know how I could leave her stranded in the hallway, asking what was wrong with me, that I couldn't even let her inside her own home after everything she'd been through. I stood there with my gym bag and just looked at her. Told her this wasn't her home. Never was legally. My name on the lease, my apartment for 3 years before she moved in, and she'd made her choice about where she wanted to be when she sent me that video. She switched tactics immediately. Started crying, saying she'd made a terrible mistake, that the guy had manipulated her and she'd been caught up in the luxury and attention, and she never meant any of it. Said she'd been stupid and impulsive, but she loved me and wanted to fix everything. Kept reaching for my arm, and I kept stepping back. Here's where it got interesting. I asked her about the joint account money. She claimed she'd only taken it because she panicked when her cards weren't working in Dubai and she needed cash for emergencies. I pulled up my banking app right there in the hallway and showed her the timestamps. She'd withdrawn that money before sending me the message about the rich guy. Withdrew it at 9 a.m. Dubai time and didn't text me until 2 p.m. She'd planned the whole thing, taken the money first, then told me about her new man. Her face changed when I showed her that. The tears stopped. She told me I was being petty and controlling, that the money was half hers anyway since we'd both been putting money into that account. I reminded her that I'd been putting in $1,800 a month while she contributed maybe $400 on a good month, and the account was in my name with her as an authorized user. She said that didn't matter. We were partners. What's mine was hers. I told her no. We were done, and she needed to leave. She refused. Said she had nowhere to go at 11 p.m. and I couldn't just kick her out on the street. Started getting loud about it. My neighbor Fraser actually opened his door and asked if everything was okay. Georgia immediately tried to play the victim, telling him I'd locked her out of her own apartment and was being cruel after she'd had a traumatic experience overseas. Fraser looked at me. I'd talked to him Sunday, actually given him a heads up about the situation because I knew Georgia would try something like this. Told him the basics. Girlfriend cheated, sent me proof, cleared out our money, and now wanted back in after facing consequences. Fraser just nodded at Georgia and told her she should probably find somewhere else to stay tonight, and closed his door. Georgia turned on me, said I'd been turning people against her, poisoning everyone with my version of events. I asked her what her version was exactly, what possible interpretation of that video, and those messages made her look like anything other than exactly what she was. She claimed the video was taken out of context, that the guy was just a conference attendee she'd been networking with, that they'd been in a group setting, and I'd only seen a brief clip that looked bad. Said she'd been drinking and made stupid jokes she didn't mean because she was trying to impress potential clients. The whole thing about him owning the hotel floor was exaggerated. He'd just been showing off the executive lounge. I literally laughed, asked her about the part where she called me pathetic and said she was staying with him instead of coming home. Ask her to explain the compensation for wasting her time comment. She stumbled over that. Said she'd been angry because I'd been distant before she left and she wanted to hurt me back. That was news to me. I asked her what she meant by me being distant. She went off about how I never wanted to do anything exciting, how I was always worried about money, how I didn't appreciate her or make her feel special. Said I'd gotten comfortable and stopped trying in the relationship. Apparently, me working 50-hour weeks and paying most of our bills wasn't trying hard enough. We argued in that hallway for almost an hour. She kept trying different approaches. Tears, anger, guilt trips, promises. None of it worked because I'd spent 4 days watching her panic and I knew exactly who she was now. Finally, I told her I'd put her stuff outside the building tomorrow afternoon and she needed to arrange pickup. She could sleep in her car for all I cared. She said she'd sold her car 2 months ago. News to me. Claimed she'd done it to help with expenses, but now I'm wondering if she was already planning some exit strategy even back then. Wednesday morning, I woke up to messages from 3 different people. First was Ivy, Georgia's sister. Long paragraph about family loyalty and how I was proving I never really loved Georgia by abandoning her when she made one mistake. Said, everyone messes up and real men forgive and work through problems instead of being vindictive. Second message was from Veronica, Georgia's mom. She'd apparently unblocked herself somehow or gotten a new number. Told me she'd raised Georgia better than to be treated like trash and I owed her daughter basic human decency even if we were breaking up. Said Georgia had been crying all night at Ivy's place and was devastated. Third message was from Bobby, a mutual friend from Georgia's work circle. He'd heard about the situation from Georgia and wanted to know if we could meet up to talk because Georgia was telling people I'd stranded her overseas deliberately and he wanted to hear my side. I screenshotted Georgia's original messages and the video and sent them to Bobby.
Told him that was my side.
He responded that he understood why I was angry, but maybe I'd overreacted with the hotel thing since she could have actually gotten arrested. I told him she'd stolen $2,800 from our joint account before sending those messages. And he went quiet. Wednesday afternoon, I spent 3 hours packing Georgia's remaining things. Found out she'd taken more than I initially realized. My noise-canceling headphones were gone. The iPad I'd let her borrow for her work presentations was gone. A leather jacket I'd bought last year that she'd been borrowing was gone. And weirdly, a bunch of my old college textbooks from my logistics degree were missing from my bookshelf. I made a detailed list of everything, took photos, put it all in a shared folder, and sent the link to Georgia with a message saying she had until Friday to return my property or I'd file a police report for theft. She called me immediately, started screaming about how I was threatening her now, how those items were gifts or she'd borrowed them with permission. The textbooks apparently she'd donated to a library sale months ago without asking me because she thought I didn't need them anymore. The iPad she claimed was hers because I'd given it to her for Christmas 2 years ago. I reminded her that I'd given it to her to use, not to keep if we broke up, and I still had the receipt in my name. The conversation devolved fast. She said I was being materialistic and cruel over objects that meant nothing. I told her she'd stolen nearly $3,000 in cash and was now keeping my electronics and clothes, which added up to probably another $2,000 worth of my property. She said I'd spent the last year and a half enjoying her company and cooking and emotional support, and that was worth more than any money. I asked her if she'd just admitted our relationship had been transactional. She hung up. Thursday morning, Veronica called me from Georgia's phone. Told me Georgia was having panic attacks and couldn't sleep, and this was affecting her mental health severely. Said I needed to speak to Georgia calmly and help her process this breakup in a healthy way instead of cutting her off completely. I told Veronica that Georgia was an adult who'd made adult choices and could process the consequences on her own. Veronica said I was being immature and vindictive because my ego was hurt. Said men like me couldn't handle successful women who knew their worth, and that's why Georgia had looked elsewhere. That comment actually made me angry. I asked Veronica if she'd seen the messages her daughter sent me. She admitted Georgia had told her about them, but said Georgia had been going through something emotionally, and I should have been more supportive instead of retaliating. I hung up on her. Friday afternoon, I put all of Georgia's boxes outside the building entrance. Texted her the photo. She showed up 2 hours later with Ivy and her father, Isaac. I watched from my window as they loaded everything into Isaac's truck. Georgia kept looking up at my building like she was hoping I'd come down. I didn't. Ivy tried calling me that evening. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message saying Georgia was willing to pay back the joint account money if I agreed to have one proper conversation with her to get closure. Said Georgia deserved to at least explain herself fully, and I owed her that after 2 years together. But here's what Ivy doesn't know. I've been going through our expenses from the last 6 months, and I found some things that don't add up. Georgia told me she was barely making ends meet with her event planning job, which is why I covered most of our bills. But I found receipts in one of her boxes for a weekend trip to Miami in August that I didn't know about. Hotel receipts, restaurant bills, concert tickets for 2. She'd told me she was visiting her college friend that weekend. Also found credit card statements for a card I didn't know she had, showing she'd spent over $4,000 in the last 3 months on clothes and beauty treatments while crying to me about being broke. And the Miami trip. Those restaurant and concert receipts were dated for times when she'd been posting Instagram stories about hanging with her friend. But the receipts showed purchases for 2 people, and one of them was a men's whiskey that costs $80 a glass. So, either Georgia has been lying about way more than just Dubai, or I'm missing something major here. And Monday, I'm going to start asking the right questions, because if she's been playing me for longer than just this conference, then what I've done so far is absolutely nothing compared to what's coming. Some of you commented on my last post asking why I'm bothering with revenge when I could just move on.
Here's why.
She didn't just cheat. She humiliated me deliberately, sent me proof of it, stole my money, and now her entire family is acting like I'm the problem for not rolling over and taking it. So no, I'm not moving on yet. Not until everyone who thinks I'm the bad guy here sees exactly who Georgia really is. Update 2. Quick update for everyone following this mess. Some of you told me to dig into those Miami receipts, and you were absolutely right. What I found is so much worse than just a one-time thing in Dubai. Monday morning, I took a sick day and went through everything systematically. Started with Georgia's Instagram from August, when she claimed she was visiting her college friend Rachel for the weekend. The post showed her at the beach, at brunch, generic Miami scenery with captions about girl time and reconnecting. Nothing suspicious on the surface, but those receipts I found showed dinner for 2 at an expensive steakhouse on Collins Avenue. $340 total with that $80 whiskey on the bill. I looked up the restaurant and checked their Instagram page because most places tag customers or post about events. Scrolled through their posts from that weekend in August and found a photo from their Saturday night service, just a general shot of the dining room. And in the background, barely visible but definitely there, was Georgia sitting across from a man I'd never seen before. I zoomed in on my phone and the image quality was terrible, but I could make out enough. The guy looked mid-30s, dark hair, business casual. They were leaning close across the table, and Georgia had her hand on his arm, the exact same way she'd been positioned with the Dubai guy in that jacuzzi video. Same energy, same body language. That sent me down a rabbit hole. I went through her Instagram stories archive from the past 6 months. She'd been careful about what she posted, but I started noticing patterns. 3 different weekends where she claimed to be doing girls' nights or visiting family. Her location tags were from areas of the city where I knew she had no friends or relatives. Found one story from September where she'd posted a photo of a fancy cocktail with the caption, "Treating myself." And you could see in the reflection of the glass behind the drink a man's arm in a dress shirt. I felt sick going through all of this, but I kept pushing because I needed to know the full scope of what she'd been doing. And then I found something that made everything click into place. Back in July, Georgia had posted a story showing she'd gotten her nails done. Expensive set, long acrylics with detailed artwork. I remember that week because she'd told me her event planning company was sending her to a big venue expo, and she wanted to look professional. I'd thought it was weird she got club nails for a professional event, but didn't say anything. In the photo of her nails, you could see she was sitting in a car, not her car that she supposedly still had in July. The interior was leather, luxury brand logo on the steering wheel, and in the background through the windshield was a parking garage with a sign that said executive reserved. She'd been seeing someone with money for months before Dubai. The rich guy in Dubai wasn't some random conference hookup that got out of hand.
This was a pattern.
She'd been actively looking for and seeing men with more money than me while living in my apartment and crying about being broke. Tuesday, I tried calling her. She didn't answer. I texted saying I knew about Miami and the other times, and I wanted to talk. She responded 2 hours later asking what I was talking about. Playing innocent. I sent her the restaurant receipt photo and the Instagram screenshot from the restaurant. She called immediately. This conversation was different from the hallway argument. She wasn't crying or apologetic. She was defensive and angry. Told me I was stalking her social media and going through her private things like a psycho. I reminded her that those things were in boxes I'd packed from my apartment and her Instagram was public. She said I was twisting innocent situations to fit my narrative. I asked her point blank who the man in Miami was. She claimed it was a work colleague and the dinner was a business expense that her company reimbursed. I asked why she'd told me she was with Rachel that weekend. She said she didn't think I'd understand the complexity of her work relationships and she'd simplified it to avoid me getting jealous over nothing. The audacity of that answer actually made me laugh. I asked her about the luxury car. She stumbled, said it was a rental for the Venue Expo. Asked why a rental would have an executive reserve parking spot. She told me I was being ridiculous and reaching for problems that didn't exist. We argued for 45 minutes. She kept trying to flip it on me, saying my controlling behavior and jealousy were exactly why she needed space and attention from people who respected her independence. Said I'd been suffocating her with expectations and judgment about her spending and lifestyle choices. That her networking and social life were necessary for her career. And I'd never understood that because I was comfortable being mediocre. That word again, mediocre. Same thing she'd called my life in the Dubai message. This wasn't a one-time insult when she was caught up in luxury. This was how she actually saw me and had probably been seeing me for months while I was paying most of her bills. I told her we were done talking and hung up. She called back 5 times. I didn't answer. Wednesday afternoon, I was at work and my manager came to get me from my desk, told me I had visitors in the lobby. I went down and it was Veronica and Isaac, George's parents, standing there in my office building lobby demanding to speak with me. I should have refused, but I was so caught off guard that I just followed them outside to the parking lot. The second we were out of the building, Veronica started in on me. Told me Georgia had been hospitalized Tuesday night with severe anxiety and panic attacks. Said she'd had to be sedated because she was hyperventilating and couldn't calm down. Blamed me for pushing her to a mental health crisis with my harassment and accusations. Isaac was quieter, but backed her up. Said Georgia was their daughter and they'd raised her to be strong and independent and I'd been trying to control and diminish her for 2 years. That she'd finally found the courage to explore what else was out there and I couldn't handle it because my ego was fragile. I stood there listening to them defend their daughter who cheated on me, stole from me, and humiliated me publicly. And I realized they genuinely believed their own narrative. In their version of events, Georgia was the victim of my financial control and emotional abuse. The fact that I'd paid for most of her living expenses for 8 months was me holding money over her head. The fact that I'd canceled the hotel in Dubai was me trapping her overseas. The fact that I wouldn't speak to her now was me being vindictive. I asked Veronica if Georgia had shown her the original text message and video from Dubai. She said yes, and it was clearly Georgia lashing out after months of feeling undervalued in our relationship. I asked if Georgia had mentioned clearing out our joint account before sending that message. Veronica said Georgia had every right to access money from an account with her name on it. I asked if they knew about the Miami trip and the other men. Isaac said Georgia's social life was none of my business, and I was obsessed with controlling who she spent time with. We went back and forth in that parking lot for probably 30 minutes. They demanded I stop contacting Georgia and let her heal. I told them Georgia was the one who kept contacting me. They said I was manipulating the situation. I pulled out my phone and showed them my call log and messages showing Georgia and her family had contacted me over 100 times in the past week, while I'd responded maybe 10 times total. Veronica looked at the phone and said I'd probably blocked George's attempts to reach out and was selectively showing data. There was no winning with these people. They decided I was the villain and nothing would change that. I told them to leave my workplace and not come back or I'd report them for harassment. Isaac actually laughed. Said I wouldn't do that because it would make me look weak and vindictive. I walked back inside, without another word. Thursday, Georgia sent me a long message from Ivy's phone since I'd blocked her numbers. She wrote that she'd been released from the hospital and was staying with her sister temporarily. Said she'd had time to reflect and realized we'd both made mistakes in the relationship. Admitted she'd handled things poorly, but insisted I'd created an environment where she felt she couldn't be honest about her needs and feelings. Proposed we go to couples therapy to work through our issues because 2 years was worth fighting for. I didn't respond. She sent another message an hour later saying her silence was my choice and she was trying, but I was refusing to meet her halfway. Said she'd been willing to admit her wrongs, but I was acting like I was perfect when I'd neglected her emotionally for over a year. That night, I got a message from Bobby, the mutual friend from her work circle. He talked to Georgia and wanted to give me a heads up that she was telling people I'd stolen her money from their joint account and abandoned her in Dubai with no way to get home. She was positioning herself as the victim of financial abuse, and people were believing her because she was crying and showing screenshots of her begging me for help while stranded. Bobby said he believed my side, but other people in their friend group were taking George's version at face value. Some of them had already unfollowed me on social media. He suggested I get ahead of the narrative before it got worse. Friday morning, Ivy called me. She was direct and harsh. Told me Georgia had been sobbing for days, wasn't eating, couldn't work, and was completely destroyed emotionally. Said as Georgia's sister, she tried to stay neutral, but she couldn't watch her family member suffer anymore while I acted cold and heartless. Demanded to know what I wanted from this situation because clearly Georgia was ready to take accountability, but I just wanted to punish her forever. I asked Ivy if Georgia had told her about the multiple men and the months of lying. Ivy said Georgia had explained that she'd been networking for her career and I'd misinterpreted professional relationships because I was insecure. I asked if Ivy seriously believed her sister had business dinners at romantic steakhouses and borrowed luxury cars for work. Ivy said successful women in event planning needed to maintain certain appearances and relationships, and I wouldn't understand because I worked a regular office job. The class judgment in that statement told me everything. This wasn't about right or wrong to George's family. This was about the fact that I wasn't wealthy or prestigious enough for their daughter and sister. I was acceptable when Georgia hadn't found better options. But the second she started meeting men with real money, I became the obstacle. I told Ivy that Georgia could tell whatever story she wanted, but I was done being part of it. Ivy said I'd regret being this stubborn when Georgia moved on completely, and I realized what I'd lost. I hung up. It's Friday night now, and I'm sitting here processing the fact that not only did Georgia cheat on me multiple times over several months while I supported her financially, but her entire family has rallied around her and successfully convinced themselves, and apparently half our mutual social circle, that I'm the abusive, controlling ex who couldn't handle her success. The comments on my last post asking if I was sure I wanted to keep engaging were right about one thing. This is exhausting, but I'm not done yet because Georgia is still out there spinning narratives and playing victim while facing zero real consequences for what she actually did. And I'm realizing that if I want anyone to see the truth, I need to stop just defending myself and start actively showing people exactly who Georgia is. Monday, I'm making some calls because I just found out something about that joint account that changes everything. But I'll save that for the next update. Final update. Okay, so this is probably my last update because the situation has reached a conclusion, and honestly, I'm exhausted. But for everyone who's been following along, you need to hear how this ended. Monday morning, I called my bank about that joint account. I'd been going through old statements over the weekend and noticed something I'd missed before. Georgia hadn't just taken the $2,800 in that one withdrawal before Dubai. She'd been making smaller withdrawals for the past 4 months. $200 here, $150 there, always under $300 so it wouldn't trigger any alerts on my phone, added up to another $2,100 that I hadn't caught because I trusted her and wasn't monitoring every transaction. The bank confirmed she'd made 14 separate withdrawals between June and October using the account debit card that was in her name as an authorized user. All ATM withdrawals, all during times when I was at work. I asked if there was any way to dispute these since I hadn't authorized them and the account was primarily my money. The representative said since she was a legal authorized user at the time, the withdrawals were technically permitted, but I could file a report if I believed the account was being misused. I filed the report, didn't think it would lead anywhere legally, but I wanted the documentation. That same afternoon, I got a letter, actual certified mail, delivered to my apartment. It was from a legal aid clinic, and it was a notice that Georgia was claiming tenants' rights to my apartment. She'd apparently gone to a free legal service and told them she'd been living in my apartment for 8 months, contributing to household expenses, and I'd illegally locked her out without proper notice. I sat there reading this letter and actually laughed because the audacity was unbelievable. She was trying to force her way back into my apartment using tenant laws. The letter said I had to allow her access to retrieve her belongings and provide 30 days written notice if I wanted her to vacate permanently. I called my landlord immediately, explained the whole situation, including the letter. He pulled up my lease and confirmed Georgia had never been added as a tenant, never signed anything, never paid rent directly to him. He said as far as the building was concerned, she was a guest and had no legal claim. Told me to respond to the legal aid clinic with a copy of the lease showing she wasn't a tenant and he'd back me up if needed. I drafted a response that same day, included a copy of my lease with only my name on it, copies of my rent payment history showing only my account being used, a statement from my landlord, and screenshots of Georgia's own messages from when she first moved in, where she'd texted me thanking me for letting her stay at my place temporarily while she saved money. Sent it all certified mail back to the legal aid clinic. Tuesday, Georgia called me from a number I didn't recognize. She was furious about the bank report. Said I was trying to get her arrested over money that was partially hers. I told her the money was never hers. She'd contributed maybe $1,600 total over 8 months, while I'd put in over $14,000 and she'd stolen $4,900 total when you added up all the withdrawals. She screamed that I was exaggerating and lying. I told her I had bank statements proving every number. She pivoted and said the tenant rights letter was legitimate and I couldn't just throw her out of her home. I reminded her it was never her home legally and she'd moved in as a temporary guest. She said 8 months established residency, and her legal aid lawyer told her she had a case. We argued for over an hour. She kept switching between angry and crying, between threatening legal action and begging me to just let her come get her remaining things peacefully. I told her all her things had been picked up already by her father. She said there were items she'd left behind that I'd probably thrown away or kept. Asked her to name one item. She couldn't immediately, then said her grandmother's necklace that she'd kept in my dresser drawer. I knew this was a lie because I'd never seen any necklace, and I'd gone through every drawer when I packed her stuff. I told her she was making things up to justify forcing access to my apartment. She said I was calling her a liar about her dead grandmother's jewelry. And what kind of person does that? The manipulation was so obvious it was almost boring at this point. I told her if she continued with the tenant rights claim, I'd show up at the legal aid clinic with documented proof she'd been lying to them and they'd drop her as a client. She said I was bluffing. I hung up. Wednesday, I went to the legal aid clinic in person, brought a folder with everything. The lease, the payment records, the screenshots of her messages, my landlord statement, and also those Instagram screenshots and receipts from Miami, and the other times showing she'd been maintaining a separate life while claiming to be broke and dependent on me. I spoke with the paralegal who'd sent the letter, showed him everything. He looked through it quietly and then asked me to wait. He came back 20 minutes later with Georgia's intake form where she'd claimed she'd been paying half the rent for 8 months and I'd locked her out in retaliation for ending the relationship. She told them she had nowhere to go and no money because I controlled all her finances. The paralegal compared her story to my documentation, apologized for the letter, and said they'd be closing her case as it was based on misrepresented facts. He couldn't tell me details, but implied this wasn't the first time someone had tried to use their services to manipulate an ex. I left feeling vindicated, but also angry because Georgia was escalating instead of just accepting the breakup. She was actively trying to force her way back into my life and my home using whatever tools she could find. Thursday evening, I was at the grocery store and ran into Bobby, the mutual friend. He saw me in the produce section and came over. We ended up talking in the parking lot for almost 45 minutes. He told me Georgia's narrative was falling apart in their friend group because too many things didn't add up. She'd been telling people I financially abused her. But then someone asked why she had designer bags and expensive nails if I controlled all the money. She'd said those were gifts from family. But Ivy had contradicted that in a separate conversation, saying Georgia had always been good at treating herself. Someone else pointed out that Georgia had been posting about expensive dinners and events for months while claiming poverty. Bobby said he'd also talked to some people from her event planning company. Turns out there never was a Dubai conference for her company. She'd taken personal vacation days and gone on her own. She'd been telling her coworkers she was visiting family in Florida. The whole work conference story was a complete fabrication. I asked Bobby why he was telling me this. He said because he'd considered Georgia a friend, but watching her lie to everyone, including the people trying to help her, was too much. He thought I deserved to know that at least some people were seeing through it. Friday morning, Veronica showed up at my workplace again. Security called me down, and I told them not to let her in, that she'd been harassing me. They asked if I wanted to file a formal trespass warning.
I said yes.
They escorted her off the property and told her she couldn't return. She called me from the parking lot screaming about how I'd humiliated her in front of security. Said Georgia was her daughter and she had every right to advocate for her child. I told Veronica that Georgia was 27 years old and had lied to legal aid, stolen money from me, and fabricated a work conference to cover cheating. Veronica said I was trying to destroy Georgia's reputation because I couldn't handle rejection. I asked Veronica if she actually believed that or if she just needed to believe it to cope with who her daughter really was. She told me I'd regret alienating Georgia's entire family and hung up. Saturday, Georgia sent me a long message from yet another new number. She wrote that she understood I was angry, but we needed to have one final face-to-face conversation to get closure. Said she was willing to admit she'd handled things wrong, but I also needed to take accountability for my part in the relationship deteriorating. Suggested we meet at a park near my apartment on Sunday afternoon. I thought about it, decided I actually did want one final conversation, but not on her terms. I told her I'd meet her Sunday, but at a restaurant of my choosing, because I wanted the conversation in a public place with witnesses. She agreed. Sunday afternoon, I showed up at the chain restaurant near the highway. Georgia was already there in a booth. She'd dressed up, done her makeup carefully, looked like she was preparing for a performance. I sat down across from her with a folder of papers. She started talking immediately. Gave me this whole speech about how relationships are complicated and we'd both made mistakes, but throwing away 2 years over one incident seemed extreme. Said she'd been offered a chance to travel with a successful man and she'd gotten caught up in the excitement, but it didn't mean she didn't love me. Claimed the money she took was always hers to take, and I was being petty about it. I let her talk for about 10 minutes. Then I opened the folder and started laying out papers between us on the table. The bank statements showing her withdrawals over 4 months. The receipts from Miami. The Instagram screenshots with timestamps. The lease and landlord statement disproving her tenant claim. The confirmation from Bobby that there was no company conference in Dubai. Her face changed as she looked at each piece of paper. She tried to explain each one. The withdrawals were for household expenses I'd forgotten about. The Miami trip was work-related networking. The Instagram photos were taken out of context. The tenant thing was advice she'd gotten that she was just exploring. I asked her to stop lying. Told her I knew she'd been seeing multiple men for months while living in my apartment and using my money. Knew she'd fabricated the work conference entirely. Knew she'd tried to manipulate legal services into forcing me to let her back in. Asked her to just for once tell me the actual truth about why she did any of this. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that actually felt honest. She told me she'd been unhappy for over a year, that being with me felt like settling, that she'd met Ivy's husband and saw the life her sister had, and realized she wanted more than what I could provide. Said she'd started putting herself in situations where she'd meet men with more money and success because she deserved better than a middle-class life in a rental apartment with someone who was content being ordinary. She said the Dubai guy had seemed like her chance to escape into the life she actually wanted. When it fell apart, she'd panicked because she realized she'd destroyed her safety net with me and had nowhere to go. Everything after that was her trying to salvage the situation because she genuinely had no backup plan and her pride wouldn't let her just admit she'd made a catastrophic mistake. I asked her if she understood how calculating that sounded. She said she didn't care how it sounded. It was the truth. She'd wanted more, and I was never going to be more. So, she'd looked elsewhere. The only thing she regretted was getting caught before she'd secured something better. I stood up, told her she'd gotten exactly what she deserved. That she'd traded a stable relationship and home for a fantasy that lasted 3 days. She was currently staying on her sister's couch, had burned through whatever money she'd stolen, had no apartment lined up, and had exposed herself as a liar to most of our social circle. She asked what I wanted from her. I said nothing. I wanted her to have nothing to do with me ever again. She could keep spinning whatever stories she needed to tell herself and her family, but I was done being part of her narrative. She told me I'd never find someone better than her, that I was going to end up alone and mediocre. Realized too late what I'd lost. I picked up my folder and walked out. It's been 4 days since that conversation. Georgia has stopped contacting me. Her family has stopped showing up. I haven't heard from Ivy or Veronica or Isaac. Bobby told me Georgia moved back in with her parents because living with Ivy wasn't working out. I spent this week changing my phone number and updating all my accounts with a new one. Gave the number to my actual friends, my family, my work, left Georgia, and everyone connected to her in the past where they belong. Someone in the comments on my first post asked what I actually gained from all this besides stress. Here's what I gained. I learned exactly what I was worth to someone I'd trusted, and I learned it before I'd wasted any more years or money. I protected my home and my finances from someone who saw them as resources to exploit. And I watched someone who humiliated me face actual consequences instead of just walking away and letting her win. Georgia sent me that video from Dubai because she wanted me to feel small and worthless, while she felt powerful and desired. Instead, she's on her parents' couch explaining to them why she can't afford her own place, while I'm here in my apartment that's still mine with my money that's still mine. Planning my life that no longer includes her. That's not revenge. That's just consequences finally catching up to someone who thought she was too smart to face them.